Ordinance today to talk about the new proposed sick day ordinance, sick leave ordinance in the city of Milwaukee. Are two very distinguished folks. Seated immediately next to me is Ellen Bravo. Many of you in this community are familiar with Ellen's work. She is the former national director of 9 to 5, National Association of Working Women, one of the groups behind this push for a sick leave ordinance in the city of Milwaukee. And I should also thank Ellen for being here because she's done this on fairly short notice. Amy Steer, who many of you know from 9 to 5, suffered a mishap last week and is at home recuperating, and I'm told still in a fair amount of pain. And so we appreciate Ellen joining us on very short notice. Also want to say thanks to Tim Sheehy. Tim is the president of the Metropolitan Milwaukee Association of Commerce. This is the organization that is challenging the sick leave ordinance in court. So please, let's give them both a warm welcome to Marquette University Law. Thanks to both of you for being with us today. Before we get started with the conversation, just some brief history. On November 4th, the day of the presidential election, residents in the city of Milwaukee went to the polls, and they voted overwhelmingly in favor of a new sick pay ordinance in this city. 69% of them voted for the ordinance. Let's explain what this ordinance would mean. In short, any private sector employer in the city would have to offer paid sick leave to permanent employees, to part-time employees, to temporary employees. This would work in a fashion that if you worked 30 hours, you would get 1 hour of paid sick leave, and you could get up to 9 sick days for a big corporation, 5 for a smaller corporation. We're talking 9 employees or fewer. In general, the paid leave, and I want to be sure I get this right, could be taken for illness or medical care for the employee or the employee's child, parent, other relative, or someone with whom that person has a very close affinity, a family-type relationship. The time could also be used for medical and legal issues resulting from domestic violence, sexual assault, or stalking. Now, this policy was set to go into effect today, February 10th, in the city of Milwaukee. But on Friday, Milwaukee County Circuit Court Judge Tom Cooper issued a temporary injunction. The request for that injunction came from Tim Sheehy's group. So I thought we should have the first question go to Tim. In your opinion, what would have happened had the sick day ordinance gone into effect in Milwaukee today?
Well, first of all, thanks for the opportunity to be here. This is the most serious discussion I've ever had on a bar stool. So I want to thank the law school for that opportunity. But kind of segueing into the subject of sick leave, what would have happened today if the ordinance is passed is that any employer in the city of Milwaukee or any employer that had employees traveling through or traveling to work in the city of Milwaukee would have been subjected to this ordinance and would have had to start calculating the number of hours spent in the city of Milwaukee, working in the city of Milwaukee, to start to accrue for this sick leave policy. In our opinion, it would have taken Milwaukee, which is known for having great employers. Certainly not every employer is perfect, but we have great employers, world-class employers who understand that the best talent, the best asset they have are the people that work in their companies. And they would have been subjected to a mandate that would have singled Milwaukee out in the United States to have a provision like this. And despite what you hear about Washington and San Francisco, Washington, D.C. and San Francisco, this would have been the most onerous provision, the least flexible provision in the United States. So we think it would have set employers down a path of considering whether or not they want to add jobs in the city of Milwaukee. The other side of the coin here is what would have happened to the city of Milwaukee. It's clear from the court testimony that the city of Milwaukee was not prepared to start that process. There is no legislative history here, and so the rulemaking is a can of worms, and they would have had to start into making the rules for employers. They didn't have the staff, and they weren't prepared to start down this course today. So in our view, in short, it would have started Milwaukee down the path of not being friendly to companies trying to grow jobs, and it would have put the city in a position it wasn't prepared for.
Ellen Bravo, I'll have you address the same question. What would it have meant had this new policy gone into effect today?
It would have meant that every one of you in this room would have been less likely to be served flu with your food. It would have meant that your child would be less likely to sit next to someone else's child who had to send them to school sick because they would have lost their job otherwise. It would mean that 122,000 people who don't have paid sick days in Milwaukee would be that much closer to being able to be good family members without risking income or their job. All those things. It would have meant we would be closer to being in the modern world. Of the 20 richest countries in the world, 19 offer paid sick days. We're the only one that doesn't. And of those 19, by the way, 18 offer 30 days or more. Ours would have been a modest step toward bringing people into a situation where instead of blather about family values, we would actually value families at work.
You raise an interesting point. Should this be a federal issue rather than a local issue? And even President Obama has talked during the campaign about his desire to have a federal sick leave ordinance or legislation. Should it be done at the federal level rather than local?
You bet. And this is how we get there, by winning locally first. We won family and medical leave because states like Wisconsin won it first. Minimum wage, every reform that's ever happened happens first on a local level and then builds that momentum. We're a step in that movement.
Tim Sheehy, I'll have you address the same question.
Sure. I think it's clearly a step in the wrong direction. I wouldn't trade my economic opportunity, and I dare say most people in this room, nobody in this room would change or trade their economic opportunity in the U.S. for their economic opportunity in any one of those other countries that Ellen cited. Those economies pale in comparison to ours. And if you think you're having a tough time here, take a look at some of those other countries. I'll give you a great example. You think the economy in Belgium is a wonderful economy. They're probably the poster child for sick leave. On average, Belgians take 12 days of sick leave. The average in the United States is about 2.5. They take them because they're provided by the country and the government backs it up. It's very unproductive. It's high unemployment. And it's not an economy I would want to trade. Now, I certainly don't think that this one issue defines an economy, good or bad. But it is. I wouldn't trade what we have for the economies in those other countries.
How do you respond to the argument that the timing of this is very difficult? We face certainly very tough times economically in this country right now. And then you create an ordinance that some would say might discourage businesses from either locating here or growing their operations or staying in business.
Well, it's the corporate lobbyists that are discouraging businesses. We're not. We think this is a great economic development policy, and so do experts in economic development. Here's the thing you got to remember, though, Mike. MMAC opposed this in good times, and they'll oppose it again in good times. They oppose having any rules. We know what it means. All of us are living with the results of 8 years of corporate lobbyists telling government, hands off, no regulations, we get to do whatever we want. Please save us from that. That era is over. And the people of Milwaukee have spoken. I think they've made it very clear. Most employers, and this is the other thing that's so disturbing about the arguments of the corporate lobbyists, it rests on abracadabra arithmetic and hocus pocus economics. It's making people think it's going to be so expensive, it'll be just disastrous, that you're going to have to multiply for every employee 9 new days and then filling in for those people 9 times and then hiring HR consultants and lawyers and by the price tag. Well, that's baloney. It's not true. Many employers can comply right now. Others can do it with just a little adjustment that doesn't take very long. And how do I know that? Because they've called us and told us. Some have to change a policy in general. But, they're like a guy who emailed us and said, thank you. In fact, I brought his email. He said, I didn't do this. I hadn't offered it before. But you know what? I'm not going to wait for the ordinance to become law. As of today, and this was a while ago, I'm offering my employees paid sick days. Thanks, 9 to 5, for helping to get the ordinance passed and for cluing me in on the value of this employee benefit.
I read an article back in November, Tim Sheehy, in the Chicago Tribune, and they quoted somebody